What is the total dollar value of all of the expenses reimbursed, fees paid to, and any other consideration provided by the We Group to you, your mother, your spouse, your brother, and any other member of your family? Just the total, please.
Minister.
Sorry, mute. I don't have that exact figure. Reimbursing expenses is something done by an organization, for example. So I don't have those totals.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Yeah, what's your
Mr.
point of
Chair,
order?
sorry, no, Mr. Speaker. My point of order is, what's the relevance of these questions of ancillary fees paid to family members to the official motion that you
I don't think that is a point of order, Ms. Zerwitz. Back to Mr. Polyev.
So you're telling me that you don't know how much immediate family members have been paid in expense reimbursements by this organization?
My mother and my brother are professionals in their own right who have engagements and have for many, many years with many different organizations across the country. And I don't have the details of their work experiences or their expenses.
And what about your spouse? What is the dollar figure?
I think We Charity has been able to share those dollar figures with you.
When was the last time she had an expense reimbursed by We Charity?
I believe it would have been for the trip to London where she spoke at We, but those expenses were cleared in advance by the Ethics Commission.
And how much was it?
Mr. Polyev.
How much were those expenses?
I don't have that number in front of me.
Mr. Prime Minister, it's very hard to believe you don't have that number. You've been embroiled in this scandal now for over a month, and these kinds of questions have been asked repeatedly. I asked it to you in the House of Commons weeks ago. You've had time to get it, so I'll ask again. How much was your spouse reimbursed by We for her recent trip to London?
Okay, to take an example, for a plane ticket that was booked for her flight to London, it wasn't something that she would have paid for to be reimbursed by
what about
the
a hotel?
Charity. The We Charity would have actually paid for that ticket themselves. So we wouldn't have those answers on our credit cards, for example.
So you don't have any idea how much the We Charity paid for your spouse to travel to London?
Over the past number of months, I've been involved in serving Canadians and focused on that. But I know that the We Charity themselves have shared those expenses, and you had the opportunity to talk to them.
They have not shared those expenses, Prime Minister. They have refused to tell us the itemized expense for that trip, and they didn't even confirm she was on that trip. What hotel did they pay for her to stay at?
I don't know.
Okay. This would have been a very expensive trip, and it would have been paid for in March. Your government then, a month later, was amassing a program of $500 million, which you now admit you helped approve a month after that. How could you possibly have believed that it was appropriate for you to approve a nearly $500 million grant to a group that only 60 days earlier was paying for sumptuous travels for immediate members of your family?
The Ethics Commissioner fully cleared Sophie's volunteer unpaid work with We, whether it's for her podcast or her appearance at We events or her work as a We ambassador and ally. It was all entirely unpaid, but they reimbursed expenses, and that was clearance that was gotten in advance by the Ethics Commissioner.
And did you tell the Ethics Commissioner?
Mr. Polyev, we're on equal time here, and the Prime Minister still has time. Go ahead, Prime Minister.
Obviously, that was not a concern for me, knowing that the Ethics Commissioner had approved of Sophie volunteering her time and having expenses covered for engagements with this.
And when you became involved with the decision to approve the $500 million grant to We Charity on May the 5th, did you then immediately inform the Ethics Commissioner that you were doing that, and and also inform the Ethics Commissioner that this group was paying expenses for your spouse?
As I said, the Ethics Commissioner already knew because he had approved Sophie volunteering with the We organization a long time ago. And secondly, my knowledge of we being involved in delivering this program only happened on May 8th, not on May 5th, as you are saying. On May 8th, did you contact the Ethics Commissioner to seek permission to be part of the decision to approve this $500 million grant? Yes or no? On May 8th, I received the formal recommendation by the Public Service that they go ahead with the WE program, that they go ahead with the WE program to deliver it. And I pulled it back from Cabinet and asked them to do further due diligence because I knew there would be questions asked. I'm sorry, Prime Minister, back to Mr. Poilievre. Time remaining? You have about 68 seconds. Mr. Prime Minister, you admit now that you should have removed yourself from the decision to grant this $500 million grant to the WE charity. You were found guilty of taking a free vacation from someone who sought a $15 million grant from you, strike one. You were found guilty of interfering with the criminal prosecution of a Liberal Link Corporation, strike two. Point of order. What's your point of order, Mr. Sabera?
The MP Poilievre has brought up some points that are not of relevance to this committee and the motion put forth.
I am going to allow the question, but Mr. Poilievre, please leave time for the answer in your 6 minutes as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. You were twice found guilty of breaking the Ethics Act before, strikes 1 and 2, and now you admit a third strike by your failure to recuse yourself, and in the process you broke the Ethics Act a third time. What happens in baseball when you have 3 strikes?
That's the end of the your round, Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Prime Minister, you have about 30 seconds to respond.
As I said to Canadians a number of weeks ago, I should have recused myself, knowing the connections between my family and the perceptions around this issue. However, I did not intervene to make this recommendation happen. When the recommendation came forward from the Public Service, I sent it back to the Public Service to say, you really need to make sure that this is indeed the only organization that can deliver this program and that this is done exactly the right way, because there is going to be careful scrutiny on this. At that point, instead, I should have recused myself, but I didn't. I decided to push back instead, and that I regret because young people aren't having the opportunities they would have had this summer through that program, even though there's many other things we're doing for young people this summer.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre, and then Mr. McLeod. Mr. Angus.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for joining us today. I agree with you. Canadians are in the worst medical and economic catastrophe in a century. And I think what's very frustrating for me is that we've worked very hard across party lines to reassure Canadians that we are putting their interests first. And yet we're here today because of this, I think, very unnecessary scandal. And it comes down fundamentally to a question of your judgment. I mean, there were numerous red flags with this proposal. It fell apart the second it was announced. But the question that sticks with people is you've been found guilty twice of breaking the Conflict Interest Act. That you seem to have this, you give an impression anyways, that you don't believe that the laws that define what politicians can and cannot do applies to you. And so here we are with a case that was such an obvious conflict of interest because of your connection with the Kielburgers that has derailed so much good work and hurt students. Do you recognize what you've done here and the damage that's been done to all of us trying to reassure Canadians?
Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Poilievre, who will be followed by Ms. Zerowitz. Mr. Poilievre, 5 minutes, please.
Yes or no question, Mr. Chair. Prime Minister, you twice were found guilty of breaking the Ethics Act. After those 2 convictions, did you decide to read the Act?
You got 14 seconds, Prime Minister.
Yes, I have read the Act a number of times.
Are you aware of Section 21?
Yes, since I've read the Act, I'm aware of Section 21.
What does it say?
I can pull it up for you, but if you have it in front of you, you can remind me which
Well, it says a
number that
public
is.
office holder of which you are one shall recuse himself or herself from any discussion, decision, debate, or vote in any matter in which, in respect of which he or she would be in a conflict of interest. Now, what you've admitted today is not just that you were in a conflict of interest, but that you consciously recognized in your May cabinet meeting that such a conflict might exist. That it didn't just slide by your desk, that you were consciously aware that there was an inappropriate link to your family that would put you in a conflict. Why did you, at that moment, not call the ethics commissioner and recuse yourself?
The issue of issues for one's own family. And by the way, the ethics commissioner is looking into this right now, and I fully trust his judgment on determining it. But I knew full well that this Canada Summer Students Grant Program was not going to directly benefit my mother or my brother.
Your 16 seconds are up. Your 16 seconds are up. I'm going to ask you again, because nobody believes you when you say you don't know how much money your family has got from the We Group. So you've had a month to look into that. You knew you were going to testify here. Again, how much money total have your brother, mother, and spouse received from this organization? How much?
That information has been publicly shared, but I will highlight.
Well, then tell me what it is.
My mother
how much?
has
just the dollar figure
throughout her life.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Various ways, and is proud
how much
of the work that she's done, and I'm proud of her.
How much? I'm looking for a dollar figure.
We can get that number for you if you like. It's been out in the media.
It's been in the media, but you don't know it?
I don't have it in front of me. And quite
frankly, know how much your family has received from this organization, which you tried to give $500 million, really?
Can I answer, Mr. Poilievre?
I'm waiting. You haven't done an answer so far. Let's make this the first one.
My mother has worked as an advocate.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Speaker for many good organizations across the country.
Mr. Prime Minister, you are being asked a direct question at a parliamentary committee.
To support her because she does her own work, and I'm proud of the work that she does. Point of order. But I do not feel that it is my responsibility to peer into the work my mother is doing, because I have
point of order to suspend.
That she's doing.
Point of order to suspend.
I've come to learn that the chairperson's power has gone out and is no longer part of this meeting. May I propose that we?
It's okay. We can keep. Prime Minister and I can continue talking.
No.
I suspected that might be a problem. It's very convenient timing for the lights to go out.
Look, I got a message to the effect that his power has gone out. I have no reason to distrust him.
I hope you don't pull the fire alarm now.
Yeah, well, look, there's no intent in my own private home here in the middle of a pandemic. I don't have a fire alarm.
I
propose
the general process is that the vice chair assumes the chairing of the meeting. So we'll continue.
And that would be me. So we'll continue the meeting. And I now give the floor to the member for Carleton. Mr. Prime Minister, you have. I'm going to ask you one last time. How much did your family get from this organization? How much?
Have you read the Conflict of Interest Act, Mr. Poilievre?
Yes, I have.
How does it define family?
I'm asking you. How does it define
family?
I'm asking you how much your family got.
The Conflict of Interest Act defines family as spouse and direct dependents.
Point of order. So you're not going to answer that question.
Point of order.
So you're not going to answer the question then. So you're not going to answer the question about how much your family received. Okay, you're right.
Hold it, gentlemen. If you.
For working with we, and it was cleared
Mr.
by
Prime
the
Minister?
Ethics Commissioner ahead of time.
Okay.
Mr. Poilievre, can I welcome back Wayne Easter? Can I welcome back Wayne Easter, a man we've deeply missed? Come on, Wayne, where have you been? Were you
look,
I had things under control for you while you were gone.
I imagine that, Pierre, it wouldn't be the first time you tried to put my lights out, and that's exactly what happened, Pierre. We got a thunderstorm here.
Well, that's a load of shit.